If I say SS, one of the images that normally pops into people's minds, the infamous black uniforms and red swastika armbands of the pre-war organization. One aspect of that uniform was the black steel helmet, the familiar German coal scuttle shape we're all familiar with from countless films. However, these particular SS helmets were reserved for pre-war parade use only, and were not of the same type of helmet that was used in World War II by the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS. The World War II combat helmets consisted of three types: the M35, the standard World War II German helmet, the M40, a slightly simplified version of the M35, and finally the M42, which was much less refined than the previous two, not having rolled helmet edges in order to save both time and money. The black SS helmet looks different from the World War II versions, and it is classed as a transitional helmet, an update on the World War I German Stahlhelm. In the post-war period, the Weimar Republic's small army, the Reichsheer, was equipped with leftover World War I M16 and M18 helmets, but due to restrictions imposed by the Allies, had barely enough with which to equip the 100,000-strong army. The SS, formed in 1923 as a bodyguard unit to protect Hitler during rowdy early party meetings, had by 1932 become a completely independent part of the Nazi Party apparatus under its leader, Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler. The SS stood at some 50,000 highly trained and very carefully selected men, and on Himmler's initiative had adopted the color black for its uniforms, and the old imperial cavalry symbol of the Death's Head, the Totenkopf, for its cap badge, combined with the distinctive SS version of the Nazi eagle. Black was also a color already associated with fascist movements in Europe, notably Italy. Himmler chose black to make his men stand out, to make them look intimidating, to project power and menace, and the clothing company Hugo Boss, working to a design provided to them by SS officers, produced thousands of such uniforms. However, as the SS continued to grow, Hugo Boss of course couldn't make steel helmets, and Himmler needed thousands upon thousands to equip his SS legions. The army had none to spare, so Himmler was forced to look elsewhere for a supply. Initially, helmets were sourced from old Freikorps units, the Freikorps being right-wing paramilitary groups of World War I veterans. These units having been stood down in the early 1920s, and most of the membership ending up in the SA, with some of course in the SS. These were of course World War I helmets. But following Hitler's accession to power in January 1933, Himmler was able to source helmets, but not from within Germany. Instead, the SS purchased surplus World War I-era M17 steel helmets from Austria and Czechoslovakia. The SS stripped the M17s, painting them black on the outside, and had their liners and chin straps repaired or replaced as required. Some newly manufactured helmets of the exact same design were made in Germany as well, following these purchases, of a version known as the M18 RZM, or the Himmler helmet, named after the Reichsführer who wore one himself. On the right side of all of these types of helmet was the SS Siegruns insignia, in the early days drawn on by hand or using stencils, and later using decal transfers. On the left side was a Nazi Party decal. These helmets equipped particularly the premier bodyguard unit of the SS, the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, who very visibly guarded the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, and also appeared at special parades all over Germany. The very last time that black Himmler helmets were used en masse was at the 1940 Victory over France parade in Berlin. In 1941, ceremonial guards of the Reich Chancellery changed into field grey uniforms, as most of the SS had already done so at the beginning of the war, and their older design Himmler helmets were replaced by more modern M35s. The Himmler helmets ended up placed in storage depots till the end of the war. Some were reconditioned and repainted and used by various civil defense organizations, notably the Luftschutz Air Raid Protection Service, and I'm sure many ended up in the Volkssturm Home Guard. However, it remained a fact that black Himmler helmets became choice finds for souvenir-hungry Allied soldiers at war's end, and one GI managed to get his hands on what must be the most valuable of all the Himmler helmets, perhaps the most valuable German steel helmet of all time, an example that actually belonged to and was even used by Heinrich Himmler. Himmler himself had more than one black helmet, of different designs. From the available photographic evidence, it's clear that Himmler used several types of black parade helmet. Due to his position, he probably received an M16 World War I surplus helmet from perhaps Nazi Party stores or from a Freikorps unit. The major distinguishing feature between the M16 and the M18 are the visible chin-strap bolts on the M16. As you can see here on this example from my own collection, which are fixed low onto the helmet's skirt. These are not present on the German M18, or indeed on the Nazis' interwar updated RZM version of the M18 helmet used by the SS. There was no uniformity in parade use. The helmets are similar enough not to warrant comment. The Austro-Hungarian M17 is very similar to the German M16, again using visible skirt bolts for the chin strap, though smaller and positioned slightly higher than the German helmet. It goes without saying that either type of helmet would be extremely valuable if it had belonged to Himmler personally. So let's fast forward to May 1945 and Bavaria in southern Germany. Himmler maintained two palatial houses in Bavaria. South of Munich, on the Tegernsee, a picturesque lake, Himmler had purchased this fine villa in the small village of Gmünd in 1934. It had been expensively redecorated and a guardhouse and air raid shelter added, and here Himmler resided with his wife and daughter before the war, in close proximity to Munich, the spiritual heart of the Nazi Party, and where Hitler also maintained a fine apartment. When Hitler was in Berlin, Himmler lived in a house that he had purchased in the city. However, when Hitler was at his own home, the Berghof at Obersalzberg, a village above Berchtesgaden in southern Bavaria, Himmler was at an inconvenience. Martin Bormann, Hitler's powerful secretary, connived to keep Himmler from having a house with the other leaders on the mountain, the other leaders being himself, Hermann Göring, and Albert Speer. Himmler was forced to stay at plush Nazi guest houses in Obersalzberg when visiting Hitler. Due to a change in Himmler's domestic affairs, when he separated from his wife in the early part of the war and set up with his mistress, Hedwig Potthast, in a fine villa close to Berchtesgaden at Schönau am Königssee, where she lived with Himmler's two illegitimate children. The Reichsführer continued to visit Gmünd throughout the war to see his daughter Gudrun. Himmler used his girlfriend's house at Schönau as his residence when he visited Hitler at the Berghof, and it was remodeled to include a staff and guard wing and an air raid shelter. Himmler was nowhere near Bavaria at war's end, having left Berlin and moved north into Schleswig-Holstein to be near Grand Admiral Karl Dönnitz's Nazi government that would succeed Hitler on the 30th of April 1945. He would remain in northern Germany until captured under very strange circumstances by British forces on the 21st of May 1945, dying under even more strange circumstances on the 23rd of May at a house in Lüneburg. In the meantime, both of his Bavarian properties had been captured by US troops. On the 4th of May 1945, a small 8-man patrol from the 1st Battalion, 141st Infantry Regiment, 36th Texas Infantry Division had captured the villa at Gmünd, along with the holiday homes of several other senior Nazi leaders nearby. Himmler's wife, Margarete, and her daughter were not home. They had in fact fled several days earlier in a car with several of his wife's female relatives to northern Italy, then still in German hands, abandoning the property at Gmünd. The house was of course a treasure trove of Himmler-related items and artifacts, and the place would be thoroughly looted for souvenirs. Many of these items have begun turning up at auctions, particularly in the United States in recent years. That same day, the US 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division captured Berchtesgaden. The exclusive Nazi Alpine town and Himmler's second villa was of course discovered, also abandoned by its human occupants, but stuffed full of Himmler's uniforms and his personal items. This car, now on permanent display in a German museum, was found in one of the garages by US troops. A special armoured limousine that Himmler used to be ferried from the house up to Hitler's Berghof or to and from the airport, used by Nazi leaders, if he flew in his private Focke-Wulf 200 Condor. Again, the house was thoroughly looted by US troops looking for souvenirs. Then we have a GI named Corporal Raymond W. Dykar of the US 4th Infantry Division, who returned to New York City in 1945 with a very interesting and valuable souvenir in his kit bag, this black SS helmet. Dykar had landed in Normandy 6 days after D-Day as a medical laboratory technician and transferred to the 4th Infantry Division in November 1944 as a rifle platoon aide man. He saw combat in the Hürtgen forest and was with the 4th Infantry Division as it advanced into southern Germany in 1945. By the 2nd of May 1945, the 4th Infantry Division had advanced to Miesbach on the river Isar, where it stopped, and then took up a period of occupation duty, returning stateside on the 10th of July 1945. Dykar returned home a corporal with a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster, a Good Conduct Medal and 5 stars on his European Campaign Medal. He would subsequently train as an officer post-war. After Dykar passed away, his son donated the helmet to the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, where it has been displayed. It is marked inside with Himmler's name, and I suspect it came out of the Himmler Villa at Gmünd. At war's end, the 4th Infantry Division was based at Miesbach, which is only 10 kilometers from Himmler's villa at Gmünd on the Tegernsee. It would have made sense that Himmler's old black World War I converted helmet that he had stopped using in about 1940 be stored at the house that he had been sharing with his wife pre-war, and not taken with him to his mistress's house at Schönau am Königssee. How Corporal Dykar obtained it is unknown. Soldiers on occupation duty constantly traded souvenirs among themselves, and perhaps it was originally looted from the house by a GI from the 36th Infantry Division, and then Dykar somehow obtained it. Dykar was located very close to Himmler's house soon after its capture, when its contents were being traded in the area by souvenir-hungry occupation troops. The museum today lists the helmet as having personally belonged to Himmler, so its provenance is not in doubt. So how much is this item worth? If it were ever to come onto the market, which I doubt it ever will, a similar helmet that was documented as belonging to Fritz Sauckel, a Gauleiter, an early Nazi, which came from a US general's estate, sold at auction in the US in April 2022 for $6,500. Very few people have heard of Sauckel, but we all know who Himmler was. I think you could safely add another 0 to the price tag. As it is, Dykar's son did a very honourable thing, giving the helmet to a museum so that it can help educate subsequent generations about the evils committed by the man who once wore it. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.